All right. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds for folks to join the live stream, and then we will start. As I'm adjust my mic. There we go. All right. As the name suggests, today I'm going to talk about podcast trailers, why you need them, how you can make them quickly with the help of ChatGPT, not to write your final copy, but to help you draft it, to think about the things that you need from it, so on and so forth. And a new place that you can distribute your trailer and get a nice little bump, like I'll show you at the end of this, or soon. So we're going to go over all of that in about half an hour. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how active the chat room is today and all that kind of good stuff. If you do show up in the chat room, or if you're viewing this later on, do leave a message below and let me know, if you have a podcast trailer, what the obstacles are to creating one. By all means, share your trailer in the comments below. I would love to have a listen to it. Okay, so let's do this. So I like to think in terms of other mediums. For example, when I think of a podcast trailer, I like to think in terms of movie trailers. I friggin' love movies. And I love movie trailers. If there was, and if there is, let me know, if there was a YouTube channel that was just movie trailers, whether it be by genre, that would be amazing, especially horror movie one. Okay, here's an ideal situation. If there was a horror movie video channel on YouTube that had just trailers of horror movies, I would watch it. I would subscribe to it. I would probably hit the notification button. By the way, if you enjoy the tips in this video, you can do all of those things so that you don't miss any of the content that I put out to help you manage and promote your podcast. Okay, so I would. Why? Because I'd much rather see the trailer than read a description. I'd much rather see the trailer, see a snippet of what I'm going to get, versus just go by a recommendation or recommendations are actually pretty big, but a recommendation by someone I don't know is iffy because I don't know their taste yet, right? I'm just kind of reading something online. That's not as impactful as actually seeing part of the product. When you go to a grocery store and you might get like a sample, that is way more impactful than looking at the stinking package. That's what a podcast trailer does. It gives people the ability, it gives listeners the ability, it gives your viewers or followers on different platforms that you're putting your podcast trailer the ability to sample. Maybe not the whole content, because you may or may not be putting snippets in. You'll find out what I did for the trailer I was working on that I'm going to show you today. You may not be putting snippets, but you're going to have your personality in there. You're going to have your voice in there. You're going to have kind of like the pacing and the energy and the vibe of the podcast should be in your trailer. And that is what people come back for. Like the content, the stories, the information, that's all good. And that adds value. But for podcasting, people get attached to the host. They get this relationship. They develop this relationship with the host. And that's what you would be starting with the trailer. So I'm really excited about this because I'll admit this right now, I often skip trailers and go straight to content. Both when I'm listening, I used to skip them when I was listening to podcasts, and when I was making podcasts. But recently, I've really become a huge fan of audio trailers. Huge fan. And you'll know, let me just show you now. No, I'm going to show you in a few minutes. I listen to podcasts. Let me preface that a little bit. That sounds weird. I listen to podcast trailers when I see them in social media. I listen to podcast trailers when I see them anywhere online. But when I actually I'm looking in my podcast app for a podcast on a specific topic, I often won't start with the trailer. I'll start with the episode, but because I already know the information that I desperately want and need, versus if I'm just looking for a new kind of like trailer for my or podcast for my walks or podcast for something to listen to at night before I go to sleep or things like that. So it really depends. But trailers can really, really, especially if you distribute them well, can really help people understand what they're going to get before they come over and subscribe to your channel. Hey, if you're in the chat room, please do go ahead and let me know. And I will open up manual Zoom. I will open up the chat. Oh, hello there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's keep going. So that's kind of what an audio podcast trailer is. It's giving people a sample of what's going to be on your podcast, and also who you are and what you're bringing to the podcast itself. So I kept the trailer that I was working on. I was working on it for a client to 60 to 90 seconds. I believe it's not recorded yet, so I can't show you the final sample, but I will add it once it is recorded and edited and ready to go. But I believe it'll be about 90 seconds because I really wanted there to be enough breathing room for the relaxed feel of the podcast to be in there, and for Paul, my client, to get his information and his energy into the podcast, and of course his expertise, because this is a business podcast. So please stay tuned to the end, because I will give you a place where you can add your podcast trailer to get quite a nice, probably because I got quite a nice bump on a trailer I did for this Sane and Simple Podcasting podcast a couple of weeks ago. And I'll show you all those details at the end. So why do you need a trailer? I think I described it to you. It gives your audience the ability to really get to know the energy and the value that you're going to bring to them via your podcast. It also lets them know the goals of the podcast. That's part of the value, right? Like, here's what you're going to get when you listen. Here's what we're doing in the podcast. Like, podcasts can be very deep divey, and they also have a reason why they exist. And that's what you really want to tell people in the trailer. Making trailers is, and this is probably one of the reasons I avoided doing it for my own podcast for so long, because it's easier to create and edit long form podcast episodes than it is to make a succinct, powerful trailer. I kid you not. It's the same for writing, right? It's easier to write a long-winded message than it is to write a good, strong summary. And I'll tell you, with this trailer, what I was trying to do initially was I was trying to take snippets of Paul's episodes and have like a funny moment and a thinky moment and all these kinds of moments, and blend them in with narration in between. And I was making it so complicated. And let me tell you, you know how people write the books they need to read? I'm making the podcast episodes that I need to listen to and watch, because I needed to simplify it. And after hours and hours of listening and outlining and doing all these things with his old episodes, I actually realized, hey, I think it'd be better if we just talked about the content and had his personality and expertise come out in that script without any snippets. But also with the music that he uses in there, because I think that really shows his personality and the vibe of the podcast as well. So I overcomplicated it, and I'm here to beg you to not do that. You can have snippets of your podcast episode, especially if you have multiple voices. And I think that's the thing that convinced me at the end not to use snippets from Paul's podcast, because it's mostly him talking, similar to what I'm doing on these most of the time. So it just, at the end, it felt like overcomplicating it to bring in snippets of him between his narration. And I thought it might sound a little weird to do that. So we scrapped all of that and went back to the beginning. And I actually took key information from the podcast and created a script for him that he is in the process of recording. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out. So that was the biggest challenge for me in this. Once I let go of having snippets in the solo podcast that I was doing the trailer for, then it was easier. Then it was just a matter of me and ChatGPT prompt chaining our way through what we wanted in it, how long it needed to be, what were the main components, let's adjust the tone, and all of the things I do on all of the ChatGPT episodes that I have on this channel. By the way, there's a whole playlist of ChatGPT tutorials where I'm literally showing you with my phone, because I use the voice feature a lot, and I walk you through step by step what I do with Chatty to get the output that I need so that I can just take it at the end and copy it over. Because by then it's so fused of me and ChatGPT together that it no longer sounds like AI, but it has the focus and the objectivity of AI that I do not have on my own content. So there is that. If you're in the chat room, say hello and let me know where you're from. And if you have a podcast trailer, feel free to drop the link to your trailer. I would love to have a listen to it. So that's why you need a trailer. And some of the obstacles that I personally had when making one. Keep it simple. You can always replace it later if you decide that you want something more polished or if something changes. I've heard that some people change their trailer every 6 months or every year to kind of get updated with the bigger picture view of what the podcast is about at that point, because like all creative projects, even if they are business, podcasts are still a creative endeavor. You're creating something quite magical, might I add. Like all creative projects, they change and grow over time. So you'll want to update your trailer as you go. Now, the structure that we ended up using, and by we, I mean ChatGPT and I, is that I decided to start with the problem. What is the problem that the podcast is solving? What frustration does the listener have? Now, Paul has two main audiences, fellow bookkeepers as well as small business owners. So, what was the frustration that they were having? And then, of course, some information on the host and his credentials and things like that. And then the solution. How is this podcast helping that problem? So that's really what I wanted to focus the podcast on by bringing in elements of the podcast itself. And I also wanted to focus on the mindset, the bigger picture, and the feel of the show. That's not in script necessarily. Like, we don't talk about, and this trailer, has this kind of mindset and this tone. No, but that's how we massaged the words that were in there, was thinking of the overall mindset of the podcast. Paul is doing a bookkeeping podcast, but he's also a lot of the time really trying to reshape how people think about bookkeeping, not just the numbers, not just the tasks, but the relationships that bookkeepers have with their clients, that the relationship that small business owners have with their bookkeepers and their accountants. And it's very relationship heavy, and it's very focused on the personality of the businesses. And that is a big phrase that he uses over and over in the podcast and that we pulled into the trailer. So what you really want to do in your podcast trailer is pull out, if you're not using clips, if it's just like a one-person show and you're not using clips, pull out words and phrases that you use often that really give the flavor of the podcast, because you want people to know how you're describing things, how you're talking about the things in your podcast. So personality of the business was a big phrase that we pulled into the trailer for sure. I also wanted it to have a very clear call to action. As far as where to listen, what to do when they're done listening to the trailer, where to listen, what to do at the end of the trailer, and that kind of thing. I didn't want any confusion on, well, okay, I've listened to this, now what? How do I find it? No, I wanted that to be super duper clear. And a lot of people will mention all of the platforms or just the main platforms. And what I really wanted to do was mention the platforms that were most relevant to Paul, which included not just the audio, but his YouTube channel and his Substack newsletter. And, people be like, oh, but I haven't really done a lot there yet. If they have a newsletter or a YouTube channel, it's okay. your trailer's going to be active for a while. If you do anything any of the time on those places, list it so people can get on your newsletter list, so people can start following your YouTube. So when you do produce content, they'll be there. So don't be shy about your CTA. Be very clear about what you want people to do when they're done with the trailer. The trailer exists to give them a flavor of the podcast, but they can't eat the meal if they don't have the dish in front of them. Did that work? I hope that analogy worked. La 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 la. Right. So that's that. Now, I did make notes for this because oh my gosh, my prompt chaining with ChatGPT was quite long, and I didn't want to read off or show you the chat necessarily in this video. I do that in the other ones on the ChatGPT playlist, but on this one, because it's a vertical live, it doesn't look too great. So I wanted to talk you through it. So I did make some notes. So if my eyes wander, it's because I'm reading my notes. So yeah, so we walked through. I didn't just say to ChatGPT, write me a trailer. I actually went into one of the episode prompts that I did where I was asking for help on writing show notes for one of his episodes, because that had a bit of the flavor and the tone and the information of his podcast. And so I went in there and I didn't just say, write me a trailer. I said, hey, I need help writing a trailer, podcast trailer script for this podcast that we've been working on. Can we go through like the main outline of what we want to do before you even write it? So we went through it step by step by step. We prompt chained the heck out of this thing. So by the end, when I copied it over to a Google Doc and shared it with Paul, it was, again, very, very much so my ideas with ChatGPT's organization and clarity. Because when you're too close to a project, it's hard to be clear sometimes. And that's where I find, for me, that's when ChatGPT is the most helpful. So I started with a single question at a time. One question, ChatGPT would ask me a question about the trailer. I would answer, and we would go back and forth until that bit was complete. And then we would go on to the next question and the next question and the next question. And you're probably wondering, what kind of questions did ChatGPT ask you? Like, I actually have the conversation here. Let me see. So it asked me how long it wanted to be. It asked me what I wanted to start with. What's the purpose, the deeper purpose? I love this question. What's the deeper purpose of why behind the show? What transformation or goal does your client want for listeners? I love that question. That is a question that should be the center of your podcast trailer. Like, what are you changing in that person's lives? Because believe it or not, you are changing lives with your podcast, and your trailer can cue people in that is happening. And then what kind of details do you want? What tone do you want? You know the questions, and how does that sound when she, depending on the voice. Because I did this over the course of a few different sessions. So all of those are some of the questions that ChatGPT asked me to get to the information we needed for the trailer. So we started with a single question. We worked on short pieces, and then eventually we threaded them all together and worked on that really strong, clear CTA at the end. The back and forth nature of prompt chaining is really powerful. I cannot tell you how powerful this is. Like, if you go to ChatGPT and you say, hey, write me this, you'll have to take that and pull it over somewhere else and then do all of the editing yourself, especially with the mobile app for ChatGPT. You can literally take that information and say, hey, ask me a question one at a time, and go back verbally, back and forth until that part of it is done, and then move on to the next one. It is the most liberating thing to not have to manually edit something and have somebody or something else go in and help you adjust it as needed, slowly and methodically. I freaking love this. So that's how we made the trailer. That back and forth prompt chaining is just mwah, chef's kiss, gorgeous. What made the trailer feel right at the end? How did I know it was done? When it started to sound like Paul. Similar to when I write his show notes, I really want it to sound like him, not me. And because I actually edit his audio as well, it's easy for me to do that. I can get into the head. I mean, I started my longest career was as an English language teacher, and I've always been a language geek despite the fact that I suck at learning other languages. So for me, once I hear people talking, I automatically get into like their wordy nuances. So by hearing him and editing his audio, I could do his show notes. By doing many of his show notes over the past 2 years, I kind of knew how he might sound. Of course, he has ultimate decision when he records this soon to change it as needed if he feels like there's something that doesn't sound like him. But that's how I got it as close as I could to sounding like him. And when I could hear his voice in my head when I was reading it, that's when I knew that we were at the right spot and we could go on to the next section and the next part of it and the next part of it. And there was a balance between clarity and personality. I wanted it to sound like him, and I wanted it to be really clear on what was important in that part of the trailer with the value that the listener was going to get, the CTA, the examples, his expertise that he brings to the table. All of those points needed to be clear. Not rambly, because he's not a rambly person. He's a funny person. He's a very knowledgeable person, but he is not a rambly person. So I am. Hi. That's why I use ChatGPT, but he's not. So I wanted it to sound like him. I also used some, like I said, I was writing within the same prompt area as a previous show notes work session with ChatGPT. So that was an example of the tone that we were using for the podcast show notes itself. So that transferred over to ChatGPT, and I didn't have to yell at it for being formal like I have to on many times when it tries to do that when I'm in a new prompt. And I tried to get sometimes I like to put a dad joke at the end because it's just kind of cute. And the bookkeeping dad jokes that it comes up with are really funny. But it didn't quite work for this one. So I ended up taking it out at the end. But we played with quite a bit. I did about 15 minutes of prompt chaining trying to get just the right joke at the end with the to finish off the trailer, and it just didn't feel right for the trailer. For the episodes, it's really cute, but for the trailer, it felt a little forced. So we ended up leaving or stopping at the CTA itself, which feels completely on point for a trailer. Like I said, I don't have the finished version yet, but I will link it when it is finished. Paul's in the process of recording it, and then I'll edit it, add the music, and do all that kind of good stuff. But I wanted to give you some tips on like behind the scenes on how I made the script for this particular trailer. I actually did the trailer to Sane and Simple Podcasting the week before I wrote the script for Paul's trailer. So I walked myself through this entire process for my own script because that's even harder to do than writing for clients. Oh my gosh, writing about your own creative project is really difficult, and Chatty was super helpful with that. And that one is available. So I will link that below as in the video notes or show notes, wherever you're consuming this, so you can have a feel for that. And the reason why I was really, really excited about this is when I did that, I got this, uploaded it to the site that I mentioned I was going to share with you. And I do want to show you that because I got this lovely, lovely bump in downloads when I did that. So first things first, the newer place where you can actually, there we go. The newer place where you can actually distribute your trailer is James Cridlin of Pod News has a new podcast called New Podcasts. Yep. And you can see here, these are all trailers. So if you weren't quite sure what should be in a trailer, how a trailer can sound, you can actually listen to as many of these as you like. There's a lot more. There's 96 more here. So it's a fairly new podcast that he has. And these are all trailers. And so when oh, wait, I thought I saw mine. Where'd it go? There it is. Sane and Simple Podcasting. This is my own trailer. Oh, let's listen. Oh, I have to log in to listen. Yeah, no. Login stress is real. Um, we can listen in another spot in just a minute, but you can see there's all these trailers here. When I uploaded that, this happened to my podcast episodes, downloads, my podcast downloads. We had a very modest following until then, and then boom, do you see that giant spike on the right? That literally started to happen the day after, or the day it was published in this new podcast. I mean, how can you resist that, right? Podcasting is way more, way more than just downloads. But if you can't get in front of people, then they can't fall in love with you. So, first things first, you need exposure. And it's completely free to submit your trailer there. So, make your trailer, submit it to this new podcast, and do it now because there aren't hordes and hordes of people in there. I think mine was published maybe 2 or 3 days after, and I'm not going to promise you time frames. I'm not involved in that podcast at all. I'm just telling you the time frame that it showed up for me when I submitted it. It was just a few days. And that's a very nice bump. It literally doubled because it was such a modest following. I doubled my downloads. And some of the people, I know you're going to ask, hey, but did they stick around? Some of the people did. And there's still people downloading that trailer. And there's still people downloading other episodes. So I think what happened is they came for the trailer and they ended up experimenting with the other episodes, which is what we want when people consume our trailer, right? Exactly. Exactly. All right. So I think I want to play you the trailer now. Should we do that? I can't play you Paul's because it's not ready, but I can play you mine. And I'm not saying this is the epitome of what a trailer should be. I am not that person, but I'm quite proud of it. And I think I'm mostly proud of it because although it is me, it's with the organization of ChatGPT. So I feel like it's a more balanced summary and value proposition than I would have by myself just trying to write this. So here we go. It's 1 minute and 31 seconds. I will try not to be embarrassed when I do this because listening to my own voice while I'm speaking is a little weird, but let's do this. Let me pull up the screen so you can watch it while it's going. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. And here we go. I get it. You're 6 months or a year into your podcast and you've got some momentum, you've got some community forming, and you're making some connections, but there's something that's not right. Your workflow, the time it spends for you to promote it, your confusion about video podcasting, it's all leading up to a lot more stress than enjoyment, and you can't really take that time and put it into the connections that you're making. Welcome to Sane and Simple Podcasting. My name is Steph Fuccio, and I've been podcasting myself for over 8 years. And I understand the imbalance that can happen when you get really into a podcast and everything else seems to kind of pull away from the main reason that you're doing it. And that's what I'm here for in Sane and Simple Podcasting. It's not just a title of a podcast. It is a mindset where we want to keep your workflow and your promotions, your editing, your marketing, all of that simple enough that you can create a valuable, professional sounding product in your podcast and supporting mediums, but yet have ample time to make those connections and engage with the people that you're connecting with. Because that is the whole point of this, isn't it? So we want to make sure that you produce a value-led podcast, but also that you have the time to talk to the people that you're meeting and connecting with in the podcast. Sane and Simple Podcasting is available on all major players as well as over on YouTube. Spend less time on the stress of making a podcast and spend more time on the connections. Yay! I get it. You're 6 months or a year in. Oops. And let's not play that twice. So that's my own trailer that I made and put up on or distributed. It's on the regular RSS feed and all the podcast players, and I also submitted it to the new podcast, and that's where you saw that bump a few minutes ago. It's from that podcast trailer itself. All right, so we're almost at 30 minutes. So let's review a little bit. So Honestly, podcast trailer, it's probably really hard for you to do because you're too close to your own project. Use ChatGPT to help you. Ask it to ask you questions to get to the information you need to streamline the process. Absolutely do not try to do this solo. It's really hard to talk about your own projects. Don't. You don't need to. You can use the free version of ChatGPT. You can use the voice function on your phone, or you can type if you prefer. You've got options, people. You've got options. Prompt chain your way through. Do one section at a time, and then put it all together. And then still listen for the general vibe, the tone. Is that how you sound? Is that really what's in the podcast? Do you have a clear CTA? And all of that good stuff. And try to have fun with it. It's hard to write summary stuff for me. It's hard to create summary audio for me. And probably, I think for a lot of people, shorter projects are harder than longer projects because they have to be more concise. Take your time, try to have fun with it, and don't forget your music. If you have music in your podcast, use it in the trailer. I already showed you the trailer. I'm going to have all the links that I've talked about in the video notes. I showed you the spike, and I'm going to actually put that podcast where you can distribute it to and get some attention of your own over in the chat room, and I'll put it in the video notes as well. But I might not get to that today, and I want that in there just in case. Next week's live. Wow, that's really all the information. So that's how to make a podcast trailer for a minute for 60 to 90 seconds. It takes hours. I want to set realistic expectations. It probably will take you hours to do this. I'd say 2, 3, 4 hours realistically. Shorter stuff is harder to make than longer stuff. So give yourself the time to do it and do it. Put it everywhere. Put it on social media. Absolutely put it on your podcast host section at the beginning before all your other episodes. You may need to massage the date to do that. You can do that. And any reputable podcast host, you should be able to move it forward to the beginning of your podcast. So it's the first thing that people see when they go back to the beginning. And of course, like I put over in the chat room, add it to the new podcast so you can reach a wider audience, because James Cridlin of Pod News is amazing. People respect him and follow his stuff. So, don't you want those people listening to your trailer? I do. Next week, I'll be doing a YouTube catch-up. There's been a huge change in my own YouTube experiments, massive movement, crazy traction, and some experiments that I'm going to do to play with this new movement. I also went to a YouTube live a few weeks ago that I've talked about on these Thursday lives, and I'm going to share some of the information that I learned there. Although some of the traction that just happened kind of goes against something they said. Come back next Thursday for that information, but I'm really excited to share that. I'll be sharing information on both static image and motion YouTube channels for podcasts. So no matter what kind of podcast YouTube channel you have, you will be able to use some tips and tricks to help grow your YouTube channel as a podcaster, not as a YouTuber who's going to monetize and like become a full-time YouTuber. That's not where I pitch my tent, and is not what I promise at all. But as a podcaster, I want to help you find your people on podcast. Yay! All right. So any questions, you've got the comment section below, or you can go to coffeelikemedia.com and leave me a message there. And I hope you have a wonderful day. It is actually sunny. It's not warm, but it's sunny. So I'm about to go for a really long walk. Bye.